Thousands of studies over decades have shown how mindfulness can help people with their mental and their physical health. But integrating mindfulness into the healthcare system is another matter. Hi, my name is Ted Meissner, and welcome to Mindfulness Voyage. Today we're going to be speaking about new research and ideas around how to incorporate mindfulness into healthcare for the benefit of all. Please do remember to tap that subscribe button when you get a moment. It helps a great deal. Thank you, and let's begin. Our guest today is Doug Oman. Doug, welcome to the podcast. I am so glad to be speaking with you about this topic and to meet you. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Ted. It's wonderful to be here.
So, what I'd like to do is we have quite a big topic to unpack. And for those who are watching this episode, again, I'm going to have some critical links for you where links are found on podcasts. Doug, I'm wondering if we could start by just having you give a short introduction of who you are and what you do for folks who might not have encountered you before.
Hey, I'm a adjunct professor of public health at University of California, Berkeley. In the School of Public Health, I've been faculty there since about 2001 or 2002, 2001. And my focus for virtually that entire time, my main focus has been on spirituality, religion, and public health. But very woven into that, and in part, and then partly, outside of it, including secular aspects too, would be meditation and health. I've done some randomized trials on meditative methods, including some mindfulness, and but that's one of a mix of various things I've done on spirituality, religion, and public health, including an edited book about 7 years ago, epidemiologic studies, variety of things along those lines.
Yeah. In fact, that epidemiology part is something I'll want to talk with you about because when I
Sounds
read through the paper we're going to talk today, it's like, how does that work exactly? And then reading the paper is like,
mm,
oh, that's how.
okay.
Brilliant. So, what we're going to be talking about today is one of the papers that was part of an issue of the journal Mindfulness on public health approach to mindfulness. And I wanted to ask you kind of a two-sided question with this is how that issue came about, and perhaps more importantly, why that issue came about. I wonder if you could say just a little bit about what your part of that was in bringing that together.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Thanks for asking. That's an interesting question, and I, in fact, I don't think that really comes out in the printed material because it wasn't completely relevant. But one way it happened was that, um, oh, I guess beginning maybe 10 years ago, the then editor-in-chief, Nearby Singh, and I were in communication, and maybe he suggested it, or maybe it merged in our conversation, I forget, suggested a special issue on religion and mindfulness, or mindfulness across different religious traditions. So, in fact, that did make it onto the mindfulness website. There were some, uh, so that people submitting papers could direct it towards that. But he had me be in charge of editing that, and guest editor, special issue guest editor, and I felt like before really putting out a call that I wanted to give some background material that would sort of get people thinking along the same lines. Because if you have people submitting something on Sufism and something on Theravada uh, Buddhism and something else on Zen Buddhism and something on Christian centering prayer, just from all over the map, it would be interesting, and it would sort of pull together in one place stuff that may be now scattered across different journals, but it didn't, to me, it didn't feel like it would be take full advantage of the opportunity to try to get all these groups. So I wasn't sure quite what the materials were needed to sort of get them, would it be some theory of how a mindfulness-like process was involved in each of these practices, or would it be something else? And it was really hard to try to to but I had a strong sense that there ought to be something that could give a framework to hang all this on. And so eventually that led to the feature article or the target article of this journal, which was looking at it from a public health point of view. That turned out that public health would be a kind of place to stand, so to speak, on which to consider mindfulness analog, so to speak, across lots of different traditions. But in the process of doing that, it also seemed natural to be considering all these other dimensions or axes that get talked about in that paper. So that's actually the origin of it was wanting to give this kind of background or framework or something that would help put such contributions on a similar page, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, because this seems to be a very important critical juncture in the field of mindfulness and where it is in society today, that it has had at least a toe in the water for healthcare without really having that formal integration. That mindfulness is still considered alternative, despite thousands of papers showing hard evidence about how it works and can be helpful in a number of different contexts. Some of the risks involved, we need to be aware of adverse effects, for example, and all the rest of that, as well as studies around how it performs in comparison to pharmacological interventions. And more recent second round of data on a study comparing MBSR to escitalopram as just one example, and how yes, these are non-inferior with fewer and less severe adverse effects. So it's important that this get really integrated into healthcare, but that's not just a button push. There's certain aspects to that, and this is where your paper, I think, did a wonderful job of elucidating what are some of those conditions. And your paper talked about 14 different axes of alignment of mindfulness and public health. They may be very aligned and not so aligned. I'm wondering if you could share just a bit about what some of those are and maybe why they're important considerations as we look at integrating mindfulness into healthcare.
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe first and most importantly, there are lots of compatibilities in their overall orientation, and those get listed first in the 14 dimensions or axes of comparison. And one is prevention orientation, that that public health has long been oriented towards upstream solutions, as they're often called, of trying to prevent diseases before they arise. A classic case would be, well, if there's an infected water source, then go disconnect the water source so that people aren't drinking water that, in the classic case 200 years ago, water with cholera in it, or something like that. And in a similar way, mindfulness, there's a big prevention orientation of get people distanced in a certain way from their own thinking processes, so that they don't well, in some of the mindfulness literature, it gets talked about of a second arrow of, maybe a stressor as an objective stressor happens. That's the first arrow, but then we ruminate about it and we catastrophize about it, and that's the second arrow. Well, maybe we don't need to to do all that. And by doing that, we can prevent a lot of stress from even happening, prevent a lot of diseases from either happening or from being as severe as they would be. So there's that shared prevention orientation. There's also a common sense, as they've come to at the present time, that mental health is important. That's been a recognition in public health, at least for the last 20 years, when one of the US Surgeon Generals made a big deal in around the year 2000 or so. Recognizing that stress can be an important health factor, experience stress. And one other thing too is multi-sectoral intervention, recognizing that healthcare, which you were mentioning, is a very important aspect of how we take care of our health, but also things we do in other sectors in life, in society, things we do in education, things we do in our leisure time, things we do in the workplace. All of those are can have important influences on health. And so, public health recognizes that, and that it tries to get, education out there in various sectors, interventions, so to speak, out there in various sectors. And mindfulness has also been recognizing this for a long time. Mindfulness in workplaces, mindfulness in schools, so on and so forth. So that intersectoral sensitivity. So there quite and resilience orientation would be another place of a great deal of alignment. So there are a lot of these foundational areas of alignment. And then that's maybe 6 areas or so. Then there are others where it gets more mixed as to whether public health and mindfulness are have been thinking along similar lines. And so in one sense, that might be the areas where more work is needed to capitalize on the potential that's reflected in those foundational areas of shared interest and orientation.
Yeah, and I think that may be a good introduction to this dimension of epidemiology. And this is something you know very well, and I hadn't really thought about it in this way. And this is really quite, to me, a very watershed moment about just my understanding of mindfulness in the world, is that to my knowledge, there isn't what we would consider a heat map of needs of mindfulness that we might see in other, say, physical illnesses or illness outbreaks or things like that. We can see, it's starting here, and this is where the greatest attention is needed to help with those who are already having problems with this, and to prevent that from growing in others that are doing fine and still need to maintain that herd immunity, for example, or whatever that is. So thinking of that with applying that to mindfulness was quite breathtaking. So maybe you could say a little bit about that.
Yeah, heat map is a nice way of thinking about it. Yeah, epidemiology is, I think, in most universities where it exists, would be probably in a school of public health or something similar. It's thought of as the foundational science, so to speak, of public health, in that it's what public health would use to figure out where it's needed, where should it put its efforts. So I think the literal translation from the Greek of epidemiology would mean something like what is the patterning of diseases or risk or protective factors across society? What's the patterning? Yeah, who has high levels, who has low levels, or a heat map, so to speak, as you call it. So in that sense, like with something like say overweight, one would know, one would follow the issue epidemiologically. one would look for trends to see, well, is society getting more overweight over time? Which might indicate we should pay more attention to how to help people control overweight, or what are the risk factor, what are the protective factors against overweight, that sort of thing. And also, who are the groups that are most at risk? Is it men? Is it women? Is it particular economic classes, or people who live in municipalities that don't have good sidewalks, and so they can't, who is most at risk for it? So that's the science of epidemiology, to get systematic about exploring that. So in a similar way, one could try to understand, well, what's the patterning of mindfulness across society? Or if you want to use a slightly more general term, what's the pattern of attentional health, or protective attentional factors across society? And where are the people relatively protected, and where do the people need a lot more protection? That would be the typical way that public health would think about addressing a risk or protective factor such as mindfulness.
Yeah. And you brought up an interesting term that from the paper, and I want to spend a little bit of time on this as well, because it's important, as mindfulness in some areas are looking for other terms. That the use of mindfulness is like, oh yeah, it's popular but overused, and it's not real clear, and maybe there's something else that's maybe more palatable to people that we know could be helped by this. And attentional healthcare. Could you say a little bit more about that? Because I think that's an important area for us to explore, is what do we mean by that?
Yes, yes. I I think, well, a lot of listeners to this podcast, and most people probably active in the field of mindfulness research or application, would be aware that the word attention is used in the frequently cited definitions of mindfulness, like by John Kabat-Zinn, paying attention in a particular way. And maybe a lot of those people, a lot of people would be aware that attention also is in common definitions of meditation across lots of different traditions. And so, in fact, like in some of the early work by Goleman of reviewing meditation, methods of meditation across lots of different traditions, says, well, the single common factor, common thread is that it's the retraining of attention in some way. And that's certainly how mindfulness or programs like MBSR are often conceptualized. So, so that's a common thread. Now, when there are a lot of, I sometimes call them mindfulness analogs, like meditative practices in other traditions, maybe uh, uh, Hindu yoga type meditations, um, or Sufi forms of meditation, or Christian centering prayer, other Christian meditative practices, Jesus prayer, and so on and so forth, that you see them, you see in even randomized trials, you see that they move measures of mindfulness, the common measures of mindfulness, like the mindfulness, what is it? Attention and
Attention
awareness.
and awareness scale,
The
Moss.
MAA, yeah, the
Yeah.
MAAS scale. Yeah. Yeah. You see that they move that. You see that a lot of the impacts on stress, like the Cohen perceived stress scale, you see that maybe there, very often there can be equivalent large reductions in perceived stress after experiencing this. So they seem to be a lot of similar processes or similar outcomes, and attention is also in the process, but it's not quite clear how um, how fully those methods match up exactly with the common Buddhist understandings of mindfulness. I mean, maybe most of the ingredients of that mindfulness, of Buddhist mindfulness, are there, but maybe they're not quite stuck together in exactly the same way as they are in Buddhist meditation. But so anyway. That suggests that there might be productive ways, helpful ways of looking at what happens in mindfulness interventions on maybe slightly different ways, like just thinking about them as attentional factors that can help clarify, shared factors across these analogs that might be more culturally compatible, congenial with some people, or actually many people worldwide. If we look at it, from a worldwide perspective, there might be many people worldwide who might have be feel a congeniality with the religious tradition. And so attentional factors is one topic that came up in the work that I was doing. It's not, well, its attention per se is not one of the axes, but there was one axis of comparison that we called addressing attentional environments. In other words, the social environments or even physical environments that we're in, including electronic devices and that sort of thing, and how those impact our attention. Um, so obviously, if we're doing the work of meditation in a sitting practice and training our attention in one way to be maybe more under our control and that we recognize it's not us, but then we go out into an attentional environment that sort of works in the opposite direction, that would put us on a daily cycle where we're doing work and undoing the work that we've just done. So from a public health perspective, you'd want to work not just on individuals, but also on environments. So how do you think about that? Do you think about a mindfulness supported environment or maybe an attentional environment? I think we're at the early stages of trying to formulate the concepts that will be most helpful for doing that type of work. Well, let me just stop there. I think, I can.
Yeah, I think that is perfect because it leads into the next question I'll get to in a moment, but I also want to just say that as you included in the paper, cultural context is important. Having a colleague, one of my former students, who's opening a physical center that will include mindfulness practice in there, the cultural context of the people that she's bringing in for this is a very different kind of design and structure and physical space than if someone else was doing it. And that's a good thing because that is increasing the reach, the perspectives, the engagement with something that we know as human beings at a more fundamental level. This helps in so many ways. You were just saying about what some of this means, and this was the question I really wanted to get into after having a bit of background on the paper, is that there are maybe some implications from this work about how to proceed. And I wanted to ask you, were there particular things that you would encourage get some attention around mindfulness and global health care, or some things that just personally for you is like, we got some work to do here? I would really like it if this was getting some attention.
Yeah. Um, yeah, a few come to mind, actually. Yeah, I could uh, glance over the agenda at the end of the paper too, but a couple of things come to mind that have already been sort of touched on by our conversation. One is learning to recognize and build upon mindfulness analogs, if you want to call them that, across lots of different cultural and religious traditions. That I think the field is getting better on that. I mean, even since since I wrote these papers, 2.5 years ago, or wrote the first paper 2.5 years ago, and then a follow-up paper just a few months ago, there's been, I'm seeing more and more sort of reviews of mindfulness across different cultures. And I think there's still, still more work to do. And in particular, maybe more work to do in terms of checking all the boxes for it to be a scale upable intervention, in terms of getting train the trainer, validated train the trainer methods. And I don't know if certification is always needed, but something along those, just getting systematic about scaling up of these culturally adapted analogs. I guess my view is that the MBSR template, it can be adapted more than it often has been. And I think a lot of the research on that, a lot of the sort of leading researchers on that have pointed out various ways that can be done. So, and maybe more of that should be done than has been done, at least as it has been appearing in the research that gets published. But I think beyond that, I think it can only stretch so far, so that maybe sometimes a cultural adaptation of MBSR will be the thing to do. But there may be other times when it might just be most straightforward to say in a Muslim population, support them in having some sort of systematization of Sufism, Sufi meditative practices be the centerpiece of whatever they integrate into a healthcare system. Or I mean, that wouldn't necessarily be that wouldn't be one size fits all. I don't think there's any one size fits all probably in any society, but in terms of sort of the major flavors that you have behind the counter, so to speak, maybe maybe some places Sufism would be the same thing. In fact, in the special issue, there were several people writing from different traditions, a couple of people writing from a Christian perspective, saying, we think we've been doing a lot of work on Christian meditative practices, and we think, for a lot of Christians, that would be the analog that would give a lot of those same benefits, that would move a lot of those same measures, so to speak, but that would be the most compatible with her. So I guess that's one thought of mine, that more work needs to be done in sort of developing that broad spectrum of alternatives. And then I guess the other, and then I'll stop, it would be, building a bit more on this notion of attention and attentional health, with attentional environments as supporting attentional health. It turns out, if you look at some of the most recent iterations of attempts to define mental health itself, overall mental health, done by like international groups, affiliated with maybe World Health Organization, but from several different cultural zones, trying to think through what exactly do we mean by mental health. Some of those definitions, and I cite those in a reply in this final article in this special issue, do mention paying attention as being a necessary component of mental health, being able to pay attention. So I think that maybe there are seeds there that can be developed to maybe create concepts of what is attentional health, because that phrase has occasionally been used, but not a whole lot. So I guess this is coming at it from a couple of different. So let me stop there. Those are two ideas for work that needs to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think entirely consistent, Doug, what you're saying, this phrase of one size fits all is not what we're doing. One size fits one comes up almost every episode of this podcast, reflecting not just the uniqueness of the individual in an intervention, but their cultural context, their personal history, the societal makeup at the time, that it's not always the same, and that shifts, and that may be things like standardized programs like MBSR or MBCT, things like that, that have decades of research behind them for particular affinity groups. And it may be, oh, there's more than that. Here it requires something else, different focuses that are not quite aligned with the structure of an MBSR or MBCT, an innovative, different program that looks at different components. Because one of the things that also came up in your paper was that MBSR, as the example here, is not just one thing. There are a lot of different kinds of practices and components and aspects to that, including group dynamics and the rest of that, that are very important. And being able to craft things that are helpful to people where they are, and not just physically where they are, mentally where they are. And so attentional health, I think, is a really good way to approach that. So one final question for you, Doug, is on a more personal note, what is it that you might share with someone who is in healthcare right now, or perhaps is in need of healthcare right now? What is something you might just suggest to them to keep in mind, or as an encouragement for whatever it is they happen to be going through?
Another type of, I think you can call it attentional intervention, that maybe has it in its development, it's adopted a different, possibly complementary strategy to MBSR in how it tries to accommodate diverse cultural approaches. I think MBSR has tried to take out, overt Buddhist references, and in that way sort of secularize itself to be as adaptable as possible across cultures. But another approach has been used by a mantra repetition program that gets talked about a little bit in the special issue, including in my reply article, that it notices that across lots of different traditions, cultures, there's been found to be value of repeating a holy name over and over again, and that this, like in times of stress, or in times of insomnia, or I've used it sometimes when I had to undergo medical tests, for example. This will hurt a whole lot. Well, I kept repeating the mantra, and maybe that served to turn my attention away from wherever the pain was coming from, and I didn't experience it as hurting a whole lot for some whatever reason. But this the mantram repetition. Mantram is a Asian word of Asian origin, but a synonym would be holy name repetition. The word gets stuck, and so you have these phrases of power that get you. In Buddhism, it would be in Tibetan mantram would be Om Mani Padme Hum, or East Asia Nembutsu. In Christianity, often just the name of Jesus. In Islam, the name of Allah. Anyway, there are lots of these, and there have been, in fact, I think one of the most uh, developed, I would almost call it a complement to the mindfulness practices, the MBSR type practices, has been a mantra repetition that Jill Borman of the San Diego Veterans Administration did a whole lot of development a lot of that within the Veterans Administration. So if you can do it within a government institution like the United States Veterans Administration, well, you'd think you could do it lots and lots of places. And so I would say, to get back, and it's often been delivered in a group format where people are given lists of many traditional mantras, encouraged to take something from tradition, because that can be more powerful over time. Even if right at the beginning you think you want to say like the name of your favorite food or favorite comfort food or something, but maybe over time, if it's pointing towards a wisdom tradition, that will connect you with the wisdom of that wisdom tradition. So Jill Borman has developed that. She and her colleagues have even done the trainer piece, validated that various methods of training trainers could produce equivalent results. So I would say if you're in the healthcare system, to get back to your original question, if you're dealing with some issue, then you could, if MBSR is a really good match for you, it feels just right in terms of your cultural background, go with that. If it feels like maybe there's something missing, maybe there's some spirituality in your worldview, in your social circle, that somehow MBSR is neglecting or failing to resonate with as much as it feels like you'd want what you're doing to resonate, then you could also consider maybe drawing on a mantra. Now, I sometimes hesitate to say mixed together, cafeteria style. So I'm not sure what the implications of mixing those together. I've sort of encouraged. In fact, I think somewhere near the end, I say if there's one thing we should explore is maybe if there's one missing ingredient that was taken out of MBSR that should be put back in as a way to accommodate much broader cultural and religious diversity, maybe repetition of a mantra. Now, I'm not sure. I haven't heard what John Kabat-Zinn and all the other people who have been doing the MBSR work for so many years might think about that. But I would say if you're a person right there in the system trying to figure out what will work for you, at least those are two starting points you might keep in mind, as well as whatever contemplative practices within your tradition. So sorry I can't give a more definitive answer, but hopefully the starting points, and then connect, of course, connect with other people. Find people who can be supportive of you, and that also you can support, because supporting them will also help you not to dwell exclusively in an unhealthy way. Will help to keep your own situation in proportion.
Yeah, well said. So for those who are watching or listening, again, I will have some links for you where links are found based on the platform where you're consuming this. Our guest today, Doug Oman. Doug, thank you so much for being here. Really good to be with you today.
My pleasure. Thank you very much, Ted. It's been great to be here.
Thanks so much for being here today. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope you did as well. As a reminder, please do, if you haven't already, tap that subscribe button. It helps a great deal. And do remember that every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. And I'll see you again soon on Mindfulness Voyage.